So in this lesson, we come to working with blocks, which is what Squarespace uses to make up all of our content. And essentially, now is when we're going to start customizing our content. So my brewery has got lots of images of a yoga studio. And once we swap those out, it's really going to start taking shape. So working with blocks, if we enter edit mode, I'm working from the home page first of all. And as you hover and scroll, you'll see a little blue outline around different bits of your content. And these are what's referred to as blocks. So you've got full control to move or to edit these. To edit the content itself in a text block, you simply click or double click and type over what's here. So this could say, welcome to our brewery. And this is just a demonstration, so I'm not going to swap all the content out, but just to give you a general idea of how I would theme this and the way I'd put this together if it were to be a website for the client. Now, the size and the positioning, you can see at the moment, I have this text at my heading 1 size. And on this kind of desktop view, although it's going to depend on the size of someone's screen, I think I'd quite like that to be able to run across a little bit further. So this is where this grid feature that Squarespace have now implemented comes in. There was a time when this was a lot more complicated. So if I hover and just drag on the edge of that block, you'll see Squarespace is aligning this to a grid, which is invisible as soon as you release or you click off of that item. So there's a little invisible grid at work, and dragging to resize or grabbing something and actually moving its physical position, you can see a little yellow guideline pops up there to tell me that that would be centered. And in fact, I think I will center this text. So I'm going to Control A to select all that content and use this paragraph alignment tool. You know, this is quite intuitive kind of icons and features I'm sure you'll be familiar with here. Book a class, I won't need that, but I'm just going to keep welcome to our brewery. So when I deleted some of the content there, which kind of removed the need for a block of the size we had, you see it automatically closed up. And if I wanted, I could drag and I could enlarge that by dragging down. And this page is actually aligning that grid to the bottom. So before we make any more changes, let's just talk about the way that tool works and the kind of options you have to play with the grid. So as I hover over this section, if I click Edit Section up in the top right, you'll see the grid then appears, and you can see there's a row count for the grid. At the moment, it's got 4 cells, which is enough for the content we have at the moment. I can manually increase that or decrease it. You can't go below the minimum you need to fit the content that you currently have in place. And if I look down at alignment, you can see at the moment this grid is being aligned to the very bottom. I could center align it on this section, or I could align it to the top. So really intuitive, easy to use. Let's move it back to the bottom. And then you have options here as well for height. This is the height of the section, nothing to do with the grid. So this section, if I change the height to small, we've got just the smallest little sliver to show our image in the background there. It is enough space to fit the content, but if I choose the large option, that's aiming for full screen, allowing for our little nav bar, our header at the top. If you want to enter a specific height, if you click the 3 dots, you can then enter a value. It will always allow room for your grid, but a value that's, I think this is supposed to be a percentage. So 100%, as much space as you can fit along with the header. and then 15%, 1%, all it's doing is allowing space for our grid and the little padding, which you can alter under the spacing settings that we looked at earlier in the site styles. So I'm just going to put that back to the large preset. I quite like that full page impact when someone lands on this. That gives you a little idea of the options you have to work with this grid, which is really useful for laying out your content. Now you can also change the gap that's present between the cells in the grid. So you can click that first option if you want to have no gap at all. That could be useful if you're trying to tile images on the grid, but I'm going to go back to that default setting. Now if I click background, bear in mind this is the background for just this section here. This is where we can configure our background image, and there is also an overlay on the top of this which makes the text a little more readable. So at the bottom here, overlay opacity, if I move this slider up, that gives you a better idea what that's doing. So it's just as if it's overlaying a film of a solid color on top of the image, and then the opacity controls the opacity, how much is showing through. So that's quite a useful setting. The color that it's pulling on, that is related to the grid colors under the color tab. So before we change our background image, we'll just click the color tab, and you can see at the moment it's using this darkest option from our color palette. Now if I chose one of the lighter options, the overlay would use white in this case. If I chose one of the kind of center options, if you had something vivid in your theme like a bright orange, well, it would overlay that bright orange, and so forth. Hopefully you get the idea. So I'm going to put that back to, let's use darkest, actually darkest 1. So you can see the difference here between darkest 1 and 2. It's making the headings this accent color when I use option 2, and when it's on top of an image as well, it's not quite clear enough, not quite legible. So I'm going to use darkest 1 and just make sure that text is nice and clear in this situation. So let's change the background. I've edited my text, but let's click the background tab, and you can click replace or hit the trash can and then drag and drop an image in place there. So I have something in mind that I've picked out from a royalty-free stock website. Even if you do use royalty-free stock, sometimes they want you to give them some attribution. So it's always worth checking if you're working for clients. Just make sure you're using stock that you don't need to include maybe a little credit or a note somewhere on the page. Squarespace actually has its own stock library, which you don't need to attribute on the page, and you access that. If I go back to edit section, background, and I'll just temporarily delete that, click add an image, and instead of dragging and dropping, when you click this plus button to add an image, you have a few options. You can upload a file locally, you can select from your library, so that will be any imagery you've already used on this Squarespace site, so that's where you would find that. And finally, browse stock images, and under the free image tab, this is powered by Unsplash. It's quite a wide selection of images that you can freely use. Now these won't be the most unique, let's try brewery. These won't be the most unique options for your client, but it is going to save them if they don't have a budget for photography or imagery. So some decent options here. Some of the photography is of quite a high standard. A really nice touch that's now integrated with Squarespace. So you can see the results there. That would be maybe a good approach if I wanted to have this brand come across as a large scale modern brewery. I think I'm going for a more classic approach. a little more, what's the word, boutique brewery. So if I click the plus again, and this time select from library, we should see there's the image that I had uploaded earlier, and I'll swap that back in. You have some positioning options when placing images. So on top of a thumbnail, there's a little focal point circle, and you can click and drag that, and that will change the focal point. Now, because this image is filling the screen nicely at the moment, that doesn't seem to do anything. But if I save my changes, and then I click and just drag to resize the screen, you'll see that it's centering the crop on the portion that I highlighted using that tool. So quite useful, and it's worth checking the focal point in case your background is going to get cropped off. So that's already looking a lot more on theme. And as I scroll through, I'm just going to look for other sections. Sometimes on my first pass, I'm just looking for some easy wins to start throwing my content in there and shaping things up. So designing on Squarespace is very different to the process you would use on a platform like WordPress, where you would actually mock everything up in theory first. You can do that for Squarespace and then recreate from a mock-up. But I think most of us will actually just design freely because it's so easy to move and to play with elements. You're kind of designing live on the go. So I'm looking for a section I can use. I've got my home page. This is the kind of landing area. A visitor might look at the navigation, but they might scroll down. And if they do, I think the next section I want to include would be just a little something about the brewery. So if we have a standalone about page, which at the moment I have, then perhaps just a short excerpt about the brewery and then a button so someone could click to find out more. So I need to add a section. I don't want to use this one with this upcoming classes template. So I'm going to enter edit mode. And you can see as I hover between the two sections, there's a button here for add section. If I click that, it comes up with quite a wide range of options we can use. And these are starting points, again, to help us start throwing our content in. So if I click on the about heading, there are some options that Squarespace designers feel are appropriate for an about section. And you can click on people, products, services, lots of different options. You don't have to use an about template for the about section. You might spot something under, for example, quotes that you think works better in that section. So you can mix and match them, but generally speaking, it's quite good. Some of the suggestions work really nicely. So for our section about the brewery, you can see you've got some FAQs included toward the bottom of this about category. I think something that combines a bit of text with some more imagery. So this looks like an interesting one. And then I could swap my content in. So I am going to show you an additional option. If I click add section and I instead go to add a blank section, you can add blocks and create from the ground up if you choose to. So to do that, if you click the add block button, it'll come up with a list of all the different block elements there are in Squarespace. You're most commonly going to use text, buttons and images. I'm sure it's no coincidence those are right towards the top. There's other little elements like lines you could use to divide the layout. You can add galleries, and there are some quite advanced gallery controls. Under galleries, you can also create a slideshow. So lots of options to play with. Let's choose text. And again, once you start dragging, you see a grid appear. Because I began with a blank section, this includes defaults. So if I click add edit section, I could change the colors to one of the dark themes. I could use a background image if I chose to. I could edit the number of rows, although I think there's no need to do that until you've positioned your content. So I could create an about heading, make that large. I could maybe create the text alongside that. There's lots of different things I could do, but this is something I would use if you're better at thinking from scratch, if you prefer to work with a blank page. Personally, in Squarespace, I've actually found it's an advantage to work from a starting point and then tweak it from there. So I'm going to remove that for now. I'll change the color scheme to this one, which I quite like. I'll double click to change our heading to about. Notice when I did that, because I removed all the text, I can just hit undo. Because I selected all the text before typing, it actually changed this from H1 to paragraph 2. So that's an annoying little thing that can happen. You could either just start typing after the first letter and then remove the first letter, or you could manually change that at the end once you're done with it. And then on the right hand side here, this time this isn't a background image for the section, which means we can click and drag. You see this image actually lives on the grid. And likewise, our text, it's not strictly the H1 size. It's actually using a feature that will ensure this text fills this box. It will go as large as it needs to fill the box. And that option, if I select a portion of the text, you can find here in the toolbar, scale text. So if I deselect scale text, that will now revert to that H1 size and it won't go above that. So that's actually going to be my preferred option. I think it will allow me more consistency in the sizing as someone scrolls through the website. I don't mind this dividing line. I might just want to bring it up a little higher and then enlarge the size of my text. Paragraph 1, close that space up. So you can see it's really easy, particularly when you become familiar with this, to just drag and drop and tweak things and just design. Not worry about coding, not worry about anything to do with web development. Just enjoying using the platform to design, which is why many of us love it. So I'm going to choose to select from the stock images available here. Let's have a look at Brewery again. And there's quite a nice one using those barrels. And once that's in place, and Squarespace kind of automatically scales sizes, creates copies that will be served depending on the device someone's using. So all that happens in the background. You can just focus on the front end. Even though it was using the fill tab by default, it wasn't actually filling. It was set to fit. So it's clicking between them, sometimes revert it, and that is now filling our space. Quite happy for the focal point to be the center. I'll click save just to save my work as I go along. And that's looking really good. Perhaps we're overusing barrels a little bit, but that is the kind of look and feel I want to get across initially. Now, one feature I said I would add, I haven't yet, I'm going to open edit mode again, was a button to read more about the company. So this would be just a short excerpt. In fact, let's remove a bit of that. I'm just using this as placeholder copy for now. And I'll click to add a block. We'll use the button block. Drag that down as we want it to be positioned. And this is where we can choose from our primary, secondary, or tertiary button type. So tertiary is generally smaller, secondary a little larger, and primary is usually the larger size. But it depends on the settings that you've used in the site styles that we ran through earlier. Now, despite these different settings, you're still free to drag and drop the button so that it exists on this grid at a size you're happy with. So you could have a huge button that spans the full width, or you could line it up a little smaller. It's completely up to you. In terms of the colors, at the moment, and I'll just scroll up so you've got a clear view of this. Apologies, I forget sometimes my image, my thumbnail is there on the screen. At the moment, it's drawing on a color that we've used for this section. So if I click Edit Section and then Colors, you'll see that if I toggled between these, our button color would actually change. So I want to keep the rest of the section as it was, which was this dark 2 option, but I'd actually like the button to be different. So this is where we can make those fine-tuning customizations I mentioned. And on dark 2, if I click the edit button, it then takes us into the site styles in the sidebar, and it's trying to give us different colors that are present on this page at the moment. Now, to save us some time scrolling through all these options, if I hover and select, you see a little blue selection appears around this, or it can appear around different blocks on the page. If I click on the button, that selects it and it automatically takes us to the relevant options in our sidebar. So we've got an option here for the primary button black background if we're using the dark 2 palette. Now, I appreciate at first this is probably a little bit to get your head around and feels maybe unnecessarily fiddly, but it really lets you fine tune and customize the site. You're not always going to want to use the kind of defaults that are in place. So it's really useful to be able to dig a bit deeper here and pick some custom colors. So I want to change the background to one of the colors in our palette, but I want to use a white background so it's really prominent. And then for the text, because that's now invisible, again, I'll use a color from the palette and I'll use this off black. Save my changes. Now, something I've noticed that has either reverted or perhaps I didn't save initially is the styling for the button. Now, I wanted that to be all caps and here it's showing as lowercase. So to change that quickly and easily, if I go to Design, Site Styles, Buttons, I wanted this to be Futura. I wanted it to be uppercase. I gave it a fair bit of letter spacing. I think the weight needs to be, just a tad higher so it's legible when it's reversed from white like that. And rather than go into primary, secondary and tertiary, if I want to apply this to all of those button types, I can click the button here, apply to all button types. And that will match the style across all of them. I'm now going to make sure I save the changes and the page refreshes and that's done. That's now in place. So work through the website, throwing sections out if you don't need them. Here's a section I think I'll actually delete. Upcoming classes. To delete a section, if you just click the trash can icon in the top right to remove that. And just a few tips, some section types that I find are quite effective. Where you have an image in the background with some text over the top. This is actually a newsletter sign up form, but if I remove that and place a block, and this is quite an effective way of changing the tempo of a website as someone scrolls through. Instead of it being lots of text or lots of hard full color images, it can be quite nice to break up sections by just including maybe a tagline with an image softly in the background. So for our brewery, I could include say incredible refreshing taste. That's not going to win any awards, but just to demonstrate the way this could work. If I wanted, I could use that scale option to make that text always fill that space on the page, but I'm quite happy with that. And then if I click edit section, colors, happy to use darkest, but on the background tab, I'm going to increase the overlay opacity so that a little less of the image is showing through, and it makes the text that bit easier to call out. Of course, I'm going to change the image from this yoga studio, search for library, the stock library for beer, and something that looks refreshing but kind of suits the dark, moody aesthetic. Maybe that, with little hops on the table. Quite like that. It's got quite a refreshing vibe to it. Let's see how that looks. That looks really good. And then we're going to go to format. And I don't think the section needs to be this high. So under height, at the moment it's trying to take up 80% of the available space on the page. So let's halve that. Let's give it, actually then we lose too many of the hops. Okay, let's split the difference. 60%, that's quite nice. So a section like that, to me, it's really useful, as I say, to kind of break up the tempo. So as I scroll through the site, if I kind of feel there's too much of one thing or another, I like to put something like that in between, just to slow things down, to break it up. And to edit the order of sections, you can't drag and drop, but if you hover over a section, you can use the arrows to move that section up or down in a page order. So I'm going to click to move that up, and as easily as that, it swaps with the section that was above it. I could move it up again if I wanted, and then the website would flow like this, but I'm going to use that just to sit between our about section, and then I could come up with some text to give some further information here, maybe about contacting a brewery, arranging a tour, lots of options. So I don't want to bore you. The idea wasn't to walk you through every possible option, but the most common ones you'd use, and hopefully teaching you some of the tools and the principles you can use, you're then free to start building your own pages. So remember, when you click add section, you've got access to a wide library of templated sections to get you started, and you then swap your content in. So all of these sections, they're made up from various blocks. Some special sections, they have kind of pre-configured content, and I'll show you what that means. Again, this is something Squarespace has been adding to incrementally, so not everything falls under the same umbrella. But if we click on images and we pick one of these image sections, it has the little eye icon here. And the tooltip says these sections let you quickly add content items and switch between layouts without having to manually rearrange them. So that's a reason for this distinction. And it applies to quite a lot of these image templates. So I'll show you the difference. First of all, we'll add one which uses this swappable content style. So as I hover on the page, these images aren't blocks. They are controlled using this edit button here, edit gallery. And this gallery configuration tool lives within here. You can reorder the images, but you're not able to edit the grid. The advantage of that, if I click not edit gallery but edit section, is you can swap between the available gallery types. So at the moment we have simple. I could swap to masonry, and you've then got these tools to customize the number of columns, the spacing. I won't bore you by running through all of the options available, but I'm sure you get the general idea. So that's another example of those special page types that I mentioned, and it makes it easy to try out a few different options. You've got slideshows, reels, lots of things to play with and experiment with. But I'm going to delete this section type for now, And I'll show you the alternative. If we go again to images and we select one of these that doesn't have the little eye, little information icon. So one of these regular image pages. So if I selected this template, well, this time you can see as I hover over the images, a blue selection comes up around them, and I can drag and drop these around the grid. But what it means is I can't go to edit section and change presets seamlessly. This is a 100% custom layout. So I hope that gives you a good overview of the basics. Certainly enough tools to start customizing and creating some layouts that look really effective, swapping your relevant content into them. So have a play, experiment, see what some of the options are. It's quite easy to try something out, but then to scrap it or to change it to something else. So spend some time doing that. And when you feel nice and happy and familiar with it, join me in the next lesson where we'll look at a few extra features that Squarespace has to offer.